My journey to learn English. Learning a new language is never easy, especially when it comes to speaking. I've always wanted to speak English fluently, but for the longest time, it felt like an impossible task. I tried many methods, textbooks, grammar exercises, and even language classes, but nothing seemed to work. I understood the rules, but when it came to actually speaking, I would freeze. I knew I needed a different approach, something that would make learning English more engaging and less intimidating. That's when I discovered the power of stories, specifically mystery stories. One day, while browsing through YouTube, I stumbled upon a channel that told crime stories in English. The stories were gripping, full of suspense and twists, and I found myself getting hooked. But more than just enjoying the stories, I realized that listening to them was helping me with my English. At first, it wasn't easy. The fast pace of native speakers and the complex vocabulary used in mystery stories were challenging. But instead of getting discouraged, I decided to dive deeper. I started watching the videos with subtitles, pausing to repeat phrases and look up words I didn't understand. I would listen to the same story multiple times, trying to catch the nuances in pronunciation and intonation. Slowly but surely, I noticed a change. I was not only understanding the stories better but also starting to speak with more confidence. I began to mimic the way the narrators spoke, picking up on the rhythm and flow of English sentences. The more I listened, the more I learned, not just vocabulary, but how to structure sentences and express ideas clearly. What made this method so effective for me was the element of immersion. By listening to mystery stories, I was exposed to real conversational English, not just textbook language. I learned how people actually speak, including the idioms and slang that are often missing from formal language lessons. The suspenseful plots kept me engaged, making the learning process feel less like a chore and more like an adventure. Over time, I started to practice speaking out loud, using the phrases and expressions I had learned from the stories. I would narrate parts of the story in my own words, sometimes even trying to predict the ending before it was revealed. This practice helped me to think in English, rather than constantly translating from my native language. I would narrate parts of the story in my own words, sometimes even trying to predict the ending before it was revealed. This practice helped me to think in English, rather than constantly translating from my native language. I also realized that mystery stories taught me more than just language. They introduced me to different cultures, ways of thinking, and aspects of life I hadn't considered before. The detectives in these stories had to be observant, logical, and articulate, qualities I found myself trying to emulate in my own English-speaking journey. There were times when I felt frustrated, like when I couldn't understand a crucial part of the story or when my pronunciation didn't sound quite right. But I reminded myself that every small step forward was progress. I celebrated the little victories, like when I could finally understand a tricky phrase without subtitles or when I managed to retell a story in English to a friend. Today, I'm still on my journey to mastering English, but I'm much more confident than I was before. I can hold conversations, express my thoughts, and even tell my own stories in English, something I never thought I'd be able to do. The mystery stories that once felt like a challenge are now a source of enjoyment and learning. Looking back, I realized that learning a language is not just about memorizing rules or vocabulary, it's about finding a way to connect with the language on a personal level. For me, that connection came through mystery stories. They made learning English not only effective but also fun. And that's a mystery worth solving. As I continued on my journey, I started exploring different types of mystery stories. I ventured into classic detective tales like Sherlock Holmes, where the language was more formal, but the storytelling was rich with details and character development. Holmes's sharp observations and Watson's detailed narrations became my teachers, guiding me through complex sentence structures and expanding my vocabulary. I also discovered more contemporary crime dramas, where the dialogue was faster and the language was closer to everyday English. Shows like Mindhunter and True Detective introduced me to the slang, colloquialisms, and even the regional accents of English speakers. At first, these accents and informal speech were difficult to grasp, but they were also the most rewarding to master. I would replay scenes over and over, trying to mimic the way the characters spoke, sometimes pausing to write down phrases that I found particularly interesting or useful. One of the most surprising things I learned was how much context matters in language learning. Mystery stories often have layers of meaning, with clues hidden in dialogue, descriptions, or even in what's left unsaid. As I became more adept at understanding these nuances, I realized that my comprehension skills were improving across the board. I could watch other types of content, news, documentaries, even comedy shows, and pick up on the subtleties that I would have missed before. The journey wasn't without its challenges, though. There were moments of doubt, especially when I encountered particularly difficult stories. I remember struggling with the dense dialogue in shows like The Wire, where the language was filled with street slang and cultural references I didn't understand. But instead of giving up, I used these challenges as opportunities to learn. I would research the phrases I didn't know, watch behind-the-scenes interviews with the actors, or read discussions online to get a better grasp of the language and the context. Another key part of my journey was connecting with others who shared my passion for mystery stories. I joined online forums and discussion groups where people would dissect the plots, debate the motives of characters, and predict the next twists. Participating in these discussions forced me to practice writing and speaking in English, and it was also a great way to get feedback. I found that people were supportive and encouraging, offering tips on language and often sharing their own experiences with learning English. These interactions made me realize that learning a language is not just about solitary study, it's about community. The more I engaged with others, the more confident I became in my English speaking abilities. I began to feel less like a student and more like a participant in a global conversation. As my skills improved, I started to challenge myself even further. I began writing my own mystery stories, using the language and techniques I had learned. It was a daunting task at first, but also incredibly fulfilling. Writing in English allowed me to express my creativity and solidify the language skills I had acquired. I would often revisit the stories I had watched, analyzing the structure and pacing, and then try to replicate those elements in my own writing. This creative process deepened my understanding of English. It wasn't just about learning the words or grammar, it was about mastering the art of storytelling in a new language. I experimented with different genres, from psychological thrillers to cozy mysteries, each time pushing myself to use more complex language and convey more intricate ideas. Looking back on my journey, I'm amazed at how far I've come. What started as a way to improve my English has become a passion for storytelling, both in consuming and creating stories. I've learned that language is not just a tool for communication, it's a gateway to new experiences, cultures, and perspectives. Through mystery stories, I've not only learned to speak English but also to think, write, and dream in it. The journey continues, and I know there will always be more to learn. But now, with every new mystery I watch, every story I write, and every conversation I have, I feel a sense of achievement. I've turned a challenge into a passion, and that's something that goes beyond just learning a language. It's about finding a new way to see the world, one mystery at a time. As I continued to immerse myself in the world of mystery stories, I began to notice how this journey was transforming not just my language skills, but also my way of thinking. The more I watched, the more I started to adopt this analytical mindset. I found myself paying closer attention to the language used in everyday conversations, noticing the subtle differences in tone, word choice, and context. I started to apply the deductive reasoning I'd learned from my favorite detectives to understand not just what was being said, but why it was being said that way. This approach helped me to better grasp the nuances of English, allowing me to communicate more effectively and understand others more deeply. One particularly memorable moment in my journey was when I decided to revisit a mystery series I had watched early on in my learning process. The first time I watched it, I struggled to keep up with the dialogue and often had to rely on subtitles. But this time, things were different. I could follow the story effortlessly, understand the jokes and references, and even pick up on the foreshadowing that I had missed before. It was a powerful reminder of how much progress I had made, and it filled me with a sense of accomplishment and motivation to keep going. As my confidence grew, I started seeking out opportunities to practice speaking English in real-world situations. I began attending language exchange meetups, where I could converse with native English speakers in a relaxed environment. These meetups were like live-action mysteries in a way. Each conversation was unpredictable, with its own twists and turns. I learned to think on my feet, respond quickly, and navigate through the unfamiliar territory of idiomatic expressions and cultural references. I also started incorporating English into more aspects of my daily life. I would challenge myself to think in English when making decisions, narrate my thoughts in English while going about my day, and even dream in English. It became a natural part of my life, not just something I did for practice. The more I embraced the language, the more it became a part of who I am. One day, a friend who knew about my passion for mystery stories suggested that I start sharing my experiences with others. They pointed out that my journey could inspire other language learners, especially those who were struggling to find a method that worked for them. The idea intrigued me. I had learned so much from the stories I loved, why not use my own story to help others? That's when I decided to start a blog where I could write about my journey and share tips on learning English through storytelling. I wrote about the challenges I faced, the strategies that helped me, and the moments of triumph that kept me going. I also reviewed some of my favorite mystery stories, offering recommendations to others who wanted to improve their English in the same way. Writing these blog posts was a new challenge, but it also reinforced what I had learned. It pushed me to be clear and concise in my writing, to think critically about language learning, and to connect with an audience in a meaningful way. The blog quickly gained a following, and I started receiving messages from readers around the world. They shared their own experiences, asked for advice, and thanked me for inspiring them to try new methods of learning. It was incredibly rewarding to see how my journey was making a difference in others' lives. The community that formed around the blog became another source of motivation for me. We exchanged ideas, supported each other through setbacks, and celebrated each other's successes. As my blog grew, so did my passion for helping others learn English. I began to think about how I could reach an even wider audience. That's when the idea for my YouTube channel, English Mystery, was born. I realized that video storytelling could be a powerful way to connect with people who, like me, were passionate about mysteries and eager to improve their English. Creating content for the channel was a new adventure. It was a chance to combine everything I had learned, from language skills to storytelling techniques, and present it in a way that was both educational and entertaining. That's when I discovered the power of stories, specifically mystery stories. One day, while browsing through YouTube, I stumbled upon a channel that told crime stories in English. The stories were gripping, full of suspense and twists, and I found myself getting hooked. The response to the channel was overwhelming. People from all over the world started tuning in, sharing their stories, and practicing their English along with me. It was incredible to see how the community continued to grow and evolve, united by a shared love of mystery stories and a determination to master English. Each comment, each like, each subscription was a testament to the power of storytelling in language learning. Through this journey, I've learned that language is much more than just words. It's a way to connect with people, to share ideas, and to explore the world. Mystery stories taught me not only how to speak English, but also how to think creatively, communicate effectively, and persevere through challenges. They showed me that learning can be an adventure, full of twists and turns, and that every story, whether real or fictional, has the power to inspire. As I look ahead, I know there are still many mysteries to solve and many more stories to tell. But I'm excited for what's to come. My journey with English is far from over, and I'm eager to see where it will take me next. That's when I discovered the power of stories, specifically mystery stories. One day, while browsing through YouTube, I stumbled upon a channel that told crime stories in English. The stories were gripping, full of suspense and twists, and I found myself getting hooked. Whether it's through a new mystery series, a conversation with a fellow learner, or a story I create myself, I'm ready to keep learning, keep growing, and keep sharing what I've discovered. And who knows? Maybe one day, I'll write a mystery story of my own, one that will inspire someone else to start their own language learning journey. After all, every great story begins with a single step, and I'm proof that with passion and perseverance, anything is possible.